Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for one of the most anticipated times in U.S. history, the U.S. presidential elections 2020. I'm Will Mateo, Membership Experience Manager for the Australian Investment Council. Today, U.S. political expert Steve Okun will share with you the U.S. presidential election campaign insights. Steve has an illustrious career in private capital, having worked for top-tier PE firm KKR, as well as many others through his ESG consultancy. Steve served under the Clinton administration and provides regular analysis on U.S. politics, government, and trade for CNBC and Channel News Asia, as well as authoring commentary for Singapore's The Straits Times. On election night, you can watch him for 3 hours on Al Jazeera. Steve will discuss the candidates, their campaign strategies, and probably a question on most people's minds: the voting process and how that leads to a candidate's victory across popular vote and the electoral college vote. A few housekeeping points. Your mics have been muted. However, if you'd like to ask any questions to our political expert, please use the chat box to submit your questions. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Will. And this is, I just realized this is the last pre-election event I'm going to be doing. I probably have done hundreds of them over the last 2 years. And so this is the last one. And also, I'm very sorry I'm not in Australia giving this one in person like I did 4 years ago. So with that, let's get straight to my presentation. I think the thing to keep in mind, well, I guess two things. First, I have my own consultancy on ESG, but I'm also a senior advisor for McCarty Associates. We operate all over the world with a lot of former government officials, as well as former senior business leaders. And I just want to stress that the information I'm giving today is not investment advice. You are all investors, so you are on your own for doing that. But really just kind of want to set the stage, the framework, and to think about what's going to happen in 35 hours or so in the United States and over the coming days thereafter. And to do that, you need to know where we are, and to do that, you need to know how we got here. So we'll go over all those things. I think, as Will mentioned, I'm a Democrat. I worked in the Clinton White House, worked on many campaigns. I dug up this old picture. This is where I was approximately 20 years ago to the day doing Get Out the Vote in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I am a Democrat. I take my Democratic hat off for this presentation. I really try and do it as straight as possible, because it doesn't do you any good to hear, partisan spin, to help you think about what's going to be happening and why. Now I'll give you the headline. More than 2 weeks ago, as Will mentioned, I wrote in the Straits Times with my co-author. We saw a landslide building for Biden then, and we see it even more so now. And I will walk through why that is, and frankly, why I'd be pretty surprised if this election does not turn out to be a clear and decisive victory for Joe Biden. Maybe we don't know when, but at the end of the day, it will be, we think, a clear and decisive victory for Biden, and we'll explain why. So the first things you think about in looking at a presidential campaign that is the re-election of a sitting president, there's really 3 indicators about that they're going to tell you how the campaign is going to shape up and whether or not the president is likely to get awarded a second term from voters. The first is the president's approval rating. Donald Trump's approval rating is in a place that no incumbent, going back to 1980, has been elected. Unless you're in the high 40s and up, you don't get elected. And so Donald Trump, with his approval rating about 43.3, is in George H.W. Bush, Jimmy Carter one-termer territory. And what goes into a president's approval rating? It's everything, right? And so most of the country disapproves of the way Donald Trump is handling COVID. The country is worried about the economy. They disapprove of how he's handling race relations. And so all of these things are giving him an approval rating in the low 40s, and that is not a way to get reelected. So that's one strike against Donald Trump. The second strike is the country thinks we're headed on the wrong track by a 2-to-1 margin. 62% of the country, when you poll, thinks we're on the wrong track. Only 31% thinks we're headed in the right direction. Anytime a incumbent party has been above 57% and up, think we're headed in the wrong direction, on the wrong track, they lose. And so that's happened from 2000, going back to 1980. It always happens. It happened in the last election where 62% of the country thought we were on the wrong track, and the Republican non-incumbent party won. So that's the second real consideration to think about how this election is shaping up for Trump. And the third is that our economy is doing poorly. We're in a recession. No president in 100 years, one exception, no president has been reelected when the country has been in recession. If there's no recession, you always get reelected. And if there's recession, you don't get reelected. So Donald Trump has a bad framework to work with going in to get into the 2020 campaign. Okay, so now let's look at where we were in 2016, because this is the map we work off of. So in the United States, we have an electoral college process to choose our president. So it is not a majority vote of the general population. It is, each state gets a number of votes in the electoral college, primarily based on their population. So the largest state, California, gets the most electoral votes. They get 55. And then the other larger states like Texas and Florida and New York all get 20 plus electoral votes, and Pennsylvania as well. And then the smallest states, Montana, Nebraska, not Nebraska, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, all get 3. And then Washington, D.C. also gets 3. So think about the presidential election not as a single election happening, but as 51 elections happening simultaneously, all with slightly different rules from one another, which is really going to come into play in this election. So after 2016, Donald Trump won the Electoral College by 306 to 232. There's 538 electoral votes overall, and you need 270 to win. In the popular vote, he lost. He lost by nearly 3 million votes. And if you split off, if you switch just 77,774 votes across Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Hillary Clinton would have been president. So this is the electoral map that the Biden campaign works off of, and the Trump campaign works off of. So why is it that Hillary Clinton lost? She lost for one basic reason. She couldn't get 6.7 million people who voted for Obama and Biden in 2012 to vote for Clinton and Kaine in 2016. 4.4 million people they just stayed home. Instead of voting again for the Democrats, they just stayed home, and 2.3 million voted for a third party. If the Democrats can flip this just even a little bit, they're going to win, all things being the same. So this is what their strategy is. And just say, how are they doing that? Well, look, they're doing that by really, look at who they're choosing for vice president. Senator Harris, she is going to help bring out some of those people who didn't vote. Bernie Sanders isn't sitting on the sidelines anymore. He's going to make sure that younger people come and vote for the Democrats instead of voting for a third party. You look at where they're campaigning, you look at who their surrogates are. So all of those things that the Democrats are doing and are doing well right now is to get those voters back to the Democratic Party. Now, Donald Trump isn't just sitting there doing nothing himself. So what he's trying to do is to get more people to vote for him than in 2020 than did in 2016. So he's been out there targeting his base, and it is not just to get the people who voted for him in 2012 to come out again. It's to deepen his base. It's to find those non-college educated white voters. That's the strongest core of his base, and to get them to come out and vote if they didn't vote before. So that is what he has been doing. And if Donald Trump can grow his base more than the Democrats can do, he's going to win. What we're seeing right now is that's not happening. What we're seeing in the polls is that's not happening. We're seeing people shift away from Trump. But this is his strategy. It could have worked. We'll find out if it worked. But given his approval rating in the economy and the coronavirus, it's an uphill climb for him. So where are we right now? Well, right now, if you look at the 11 states that were closest within 4 points in 2016, the Democrats won 4 and the Republicans won 7. Right now, the Democrats are up in all 11 of those states, and in some of those states by very large margins, much larger margins than Hillary Clinton was up at this point in 2016. So the polls are looking very good for the Democrats right now. Happy to take questions on what's different between the polls in 2016 and 2020, but there is a difference. So what is Biden going to do? When you're on election day, here's what you've got to watch. The easy part for him is you keep the Hillary states, those 232 electoral votes. He is almost certainly going to win all of those. Then if he picks up Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and he's up in all three of them right now, he becomes president. That's it. It's over. He doesn't have to win Florida. He doesn't have to win North Carolina. He doesn't have to win any other state that's in play like Georgia, Texas, Arizona, and Iowa. So he has a very large map to work with very broad pathways. But you can see from where they're going in the last few days, their number one pathway is Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. They're confident, seemingly, about Michigan, Wisconsin, because they're not even going there. They're putting everybody in Pennsylvania, and then you've got Barack Obama going to Florida and Georgia. So Biden's path is very clear. Trump has a very hard path. He's going to have to pull, if you're a poker player, he's going to have to, I don't even know if it's an inside straight, it might be an inside royal straight, or an inside royal flush he might have to pull to win this thing. He's got to win all those states, some states that he's down in now. That's the easy part for him. He's got to hold Georgia, he's got to hold Iowa, he's got to hold Florida, he's got to hold Ohio. And then he's got to hold the other states that he won, where he's down, like Arizona, North Carolina, and most critically Pennsylvania. And there's a quirk here, which we'll talk about at the end. He might even lose. There's two states where they have elections based on not just a state, but within congressional districts. Trump could lose one of those and end up with a tie in the electoral college. We'll talk about that at the very, very end. But what do you want to watch for Trump? You got to watch, it's Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida are his three most critical states. If he loses one of those three, it's basically over, unless he gets some long shot pickup like Minnesota, Nevada, or New Hampshire, or long shot hold right now like Michigan and Wisconsin. So watch North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Florida tomorrow, and that should tell you what you need to know. Now, why do I not think we're going to have a repeat of 2016 based on the polls? The polls are very different. So just look at Pennsylvania. So right now, Biden is up over 50 points in 3 of the last 4 polls with a significant lead that puts him above the margin of error. Now you can say, well, Hillary Clinton was up in Pennsylvania too. So can we not, what's different this time? Well, what's different this time is that Clinton never got above 50%. And so when you get above 50, that means that these people have decided to vote for you. It's very rare that they're going to decide not to vote for you in the last day or two. When you're below 50 and the other candidate's below 50, it means there's a lot of undecided voters. And those undecideds can break one way or another. And in 2016, they broke, I think, by a majority of almost 2-1 for Trump. There's not that many undecideds out there right now. Boy, if you aren't decided on Donald Trump after 4 years, either loving him or hating him, I don't know how you can, I don't know how you can be undecided. I know how you can love him. I know how you can hate him. I don't know how you can be undecided. So we're not going to see that repeat, I don't think, of the polls in 2020, because the numbers are where Biden needs to be. They're above 50, and there's so few undecideds compared to 2016. So you see 2016, 7 days before Election Day, Clinton led Trump by 2 points. She won by, remember, 2.1. Biden leads Trump by 8 points. So I would think you would see an election likely closer to 8 than closer to 2 if the polls are even only off by a little bit. Okay, so what's Trump trying to do? What's his strategy? Well, he knows if this election is a referendum on him, he's going to lose. Again, we've walked through why. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to make the referendum a choice. He's trying to say it's going to be, you know what you get with me, it's going to be even worse, right? You may not like me, but it's going to be even worse with Joe Biden. And he's trying to make it a choice instead of voters saying, do I want to give Trump another 4 years? You want the voters to say, will I be safe in Joe Biden's America? Will I be economically sound in Joe Biden's America? Will I be living under a socialist government in Joe Biden's America? He's trying to make that the choice. It hasn't worked. I think it's very, very late in the game to make it work, but that's what he's been trying to do. And one of the things I think for people, in our part of the world, I'm in here in Singapore and certainly people in Australia, you got to watch China, because this is one of the only things Americans agree upon. Americans disagree on just about everything. Disagree on reproductive rights, disagree on gun control, disagree on racial justice, disagree on healthcare, disagree on everything except for China. One of the few things that Americans don't disagree on, and overall Americans have a very unfavorable opinion about China, the most it has ever been. And so what is Trump trying to do? He's trying to make the election a choice about China. He's trying to say, if you want to stop China, you got to stop China Joe, and that he's sending out fundraisers saying that Biden is a puppet of the Chinese Communist government, and he's trying to attack Joe Biden through Hunter Biden and his business dealings in China. So what has that done? It is shown that Joe Biden has taken a different approach towards China. In May of 2019, during the campaign, he said, look, we really don't have to worry about China. I mean, they're corrupt. Our system's better. They're not any competition for us. Now, a month and a half later, he says that, China is pressing its advantage all over the world and Trump's ignoring it. So now Biden is saying, yes, Trump is tough on China, but I am going to be tough but effective on China, because Trump is tough but ineffective on China. And we're going to have to deal, those of us who invest in this part of the world, in terms of directly or through portfolio companies or whatever it may be, the U.S.-China relationship under Biden or Trump is going to continue to be on the same type of trajectory. And I think one of the most important things to watch is how human rights is going to become part of the foreign and economic policy of the United States. It already has a little bit, but it's going to be even more so under a Biden administration, because it's Democrats and Republicans agree the U.S. should try to promote human rights in China, even if it harms our economic relations with China. So having responsible sourcing, who is in your supply chain? Is any of your materials coming from Xinjiang? Are any of your workers Uyghur? Are any of your components going into things that are part of the state system in China, like drones? All of that is going to be something investors are going to have to really be focused on in 2021, be it Trump or Biden, but I think even more so under Biden when it comes to the human rights aspect. So those are the things to watch. And Biden has said, I'm going to take on Xi on his violation of human rights. I'm going to challenge what he does. He said this a few weeks ago at a virtual fundraiser. So now the other thing you got to be thinking about is what's going to happen in the Senate. And are we going to see a blue wave coming where we are not only going to have Joe Biden as president, but you're going to have Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House and Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader, meaning the Democrats are going to control all levers of government. Right now, the Senate, 1/3 of our Senate, more or less, is up for election every year. 6 years ago, the Republicans did very well, so they start out defending a lot more seats, meaning the Democrats have an advantage right now with 35 seats in the Senate. So they only need to win 15 if Biden becomes president, because the tiebreaker goes to the party in the White House. Where we are now, this is from my old professor, Larry Sabro, University of Virginia. Right now, he predicts that the Democrats will have at least 50 seats. There's one toss-up, and that so it could be, Biden wins, probably goes to the Democrats. So the Democrats will have at least 51 seats. And if it is a wave election, the Democrats could end up with 53, 54, 55 seats even. So what happens if we have a Democratic House, Senate, White House? The to-do list is huge after 4 years of Trump. So every sector in the economy is going to be impacted. So if you are investing and it touches the U.S., or if it's U.S. companies you're working with in other countries, understand you're going to see a lot of changes coming from tax to labor to healthcare, and certainly on IT and infrastructure. It's all going to be a huge sea change as to what's going to happen if the blue wave comes in. And the Democrats are going to have a debate. Do we go full in on the Bernie approach, Bernie Sanders, which is, we ban all fracking and we have Medicare for all, we end all student debt and just give away free college? Or do you have a more pragmatic approach, like a Cory Booker, who's a more moderate senator, saying, let's take some of that progressive agenda, but also let's work across the aisle and let's work on things that 75% of the country agrees upon. So what to watch instead of 2021? What to watch tomorrow? There's 5 potential scenarios. The first one we've talked about quite a bit, that there's a wave election and that Biden wins in a landslide, 7+ points. The Democrats keep the House and take the Senate. The second, which would be a surprise, especially where we're in the polling right now, is a status quo. The GOP holds the House, the GOP probably holds the Senate, and the Democrats keep the House. So we get the status quo, we get a repeat of 2016. We could have a Clinton-like turnout in '96, where in that re-election, Bill Clinton won a second term, but the Republicans maintain the Senate because voters were thinking, I want to check. I don't want to have Democrats running everything. I like having Bill Clinton in the White House, but I like having the Republicans in the Senate because it forces compromise. So maybe you get a Biden win where the Republicans hold the Senate, or maybe Trump wins, but the Democrats take the Senate. Those scenarios, the Biden win, Republicans hold the Senate, I think is less likely than the 1980 wave scenario, but it is a possibility. Still, we could have a tie, which we could walk about in depth. That's where it becomes 269 to 269, and that is what happened in 1800 for those U.S. history majors. And in that case, the Senate picks the president, the House picks the president, the Senate picks the vice president, and we could potentially have President Pence and Vice President Harris. And then the other thing, which Donald Trump is already talking about, is forcing us into a constitutional crisis where no decision is made, no one receives 270 electoral votes because of all the disputes going on to the courts and in the state legislatures, and we end up happening where the House selects the president as they did in 1876. So we could talk about that as well if you'd like. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Will. I can hear you, Will.
There we go. I hope you could hear me now.
I can.
Excellent. So, folks, please feel free to start sending us through a couple of questions. I have a few of my own, so I'll probably kick it off, and hopefully we'll get some questions from the group as well. So, one of the questions that I have for you, Steve, is the race for the White House a done deal? Do you think the polls are overreacting? I mean, you talked about that earlier. The last time, we had the polls all over the place, and it certainly, made everyone believe that Hillary had it all locked up. What's the difference this time around, really?
So there's the couple major differences. One is that there's 3 major differences. One is that Joe Biden is much more popular than Hillary Clinton. His approval ratings are much higher than hers have ever been. More people like him, approve of him than disapprove of him. Hillary and Donald Trump, both what we'd call underwater, where their approvals are below their disapprovals. So that is a difference. There's a different candidate. Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton, and that is impacting some of what you're seeing in the polls. The second thing is that there's not the undecideds anymore. So when Hillary never got above 50% in those key states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Joe Biden has. Some consistently, some not so consistently. So that is another sign that this is different. The third thing is that the pollsters learn their lessons. And I'll do a short version of when you do polling. Let's say you poll 10 people and you poll, if 5 people say Clinton and 5 people say Trump, and then you don't stop there, because you then ask the person, well, how many times have you voted in the last 5 elections? And maybe they say 4, or maybe they say 1. So what you then do is you weight the scores of the people who have told you those things. So if the Clinton voters all said they voted for the last 5 times, and then you give them an 80% likelihood of voting again, and the Trump voters say, well, I only voted once in the last 5, or I didn't vote at all, maybe give them a 20% likelihood of actually voting or less. The pollsters did not understand how much the Trump voters love Donald Trump and how strongly they feel about him, and that these people who didn't vote or are seldom voters all came out in 2016. And so they underweighted the turnout that Trump was going to get. And the pollsters learned their lesson this time. And so they've changed how they weight the likelihood of a Trump voter to actually come out and vote. The second thing they learned is that it's not that some people say they're shy Trump voters, that they're afraid to tell a pollster who they think because they'll say, oh, you must be a bad person because you like Donald Trump. Oh, yeah. And that's not, people don't really think that that's a thing. What they do know is that Trump voters are not shy, but they're hidden, right? These are people who don't trust the media, so if somebody calls them up to do a poll, they don't answer or they hang up on them. Or, these are, a lot of the Trump voters, the non-college educated white voters who have been hurt by globalization, who Donald Trump very much appeals to. They are busy. They're working 2 jobs, right? They don't have the time to deal with both. So they're hidden Trump voters. The pollsters have also taken that into account this time. So they would have to be really, really wrong in 2020 to match how little wrong they were in 2016. They weren't off by much. They were off a little bit. I don't see that happening this time.
Right. Well, we have another question, and that question is, what impact would a constitutional crisis have on the U.S. economy?
Well, it would have a significant short-term, because look, we the United States, we need a stimulus, right? We people are really hurting right now, and the politics are so bad in Washington that you couldn't even get the Republicans and the Democrats in the House and Senate and Donald Trump to agree on a stimulus package. And that needs to get done. Now, if we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis and the rhetoric heats up, I don't know that the Democrats and Republicans are going to be able to sit down with President Trump and get a stimulus done. So that could have a real hit on the economy. So that's, I think, one thing to watch about what happens if we have that constitutional crisis. The second thing is that if we have a constitutional crisis, I'm going to presume it's because Donald Trump is forcing it, not because Joe Biden is forcing it, right? Because presumably, if Trump wins outright, Biden has said he will accept the results. Trump has said he won't, because if he loses, by definition, it will be fraud, and so he won't accept it. So if we get that, that means that Joe Biden isn't going to be able to hit the ground running in January, 20th, 21st, when he becomes president. And so it's going to slow down his administration, which is going to hit the economy. So I do think there's short-term risk to the economy on a constitutional crisis. Like a year from now, hopefully everything, that will be behind it. But it's something to watch in the short term.
Right. Okay, we have another question. Let me read that off to you as well. We noted that there's some voter suppression that appears to be growing in some of the states like Florida, Georgia, Texas, which happen to be where Trump has rallied those voters, and there's a little bit of issues around legitimacy around the mail-in ballots. Could this type of voter suppression hand Trump a victory?
Well, okay. So let's do a little bit on mail-in ballots. So mail-in ballots have been used in the United States since the Civil War. I mean, this is not a new concept that has come up in this year because of the pandemic. It has changed how many people are using mail-in voting, but mail-in voting is not anything new. So there's a couple of ways that people use mail-in balloting from a voter suppression perspective. So as an example, Democrats, younger voters tend to be Democrats, right? So either 18 to 24-year-olds, 18 to 29-year-olds trend heavily as Democratic voters, because 18 to 29-year-olds, they care, especially this year, they care about 3 things for the most part. They care about climate change, they care about racial justice, and they care about income inequality. And that is not part of Donald Trump's appeal, right? So it's even more so this year that 18 to 29-year-olds, and especially college students, are voting Democratic. Now, so what happens is when you get a mail-in ballot, and let's say, like, let's do Charlottesville, Virginia, right? So where I went to college, right? So if I'm doing a mail-in ballot and they see my ballot is coming from a dorm, right? Now they know what the dorm addresses are. And so they will literally, the Republicans will literally challenge every single mail-in ballot with a dorm address, because if they'll just, oh, the signature is off. Like, I mean, can you imagine if you sign, if a signature is off just a tiny bit, then you're going to argue whether or not that signature matches. Or you might say, well, the postmark is smudged. We don't know that this came in and was postmarked by election day. Or there's all of these other, the letter got opened a little bit, so it's invalid. So you can argue everything if you want to challenge all of these ballots. So the Republicans are doing that without question. They always do that. Not all Republicans do that in every district, but this happens a lot, especially when you can target voters from minority neighborhoods and from from college addresses. So what Donald Trump is saying now is that every mail-in ballot now is subject to fraud. So he wants to challenge all of them. And if more Democrats vote by mail than Republicans, then he has a chance to make the argument that if you only count the votes of the people who showed up in person, he can win. So he's already said it. He says, we should only count the votes that are in by election day. And if they come in after election day, they shouldn't count because we can't trust them. So you've got states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, which have said, because of the volume of mail, because of the slowdown in mail, because of the coronavirus, we're going to accept ballots if they're postmarked by election day, which come up to 3 days later. Trump was going to challenge every single one of those. So it is a potential avenue for him, and there are going to be, I think by count, there have already been something like 400 lawsuits in the United States over ballots already, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah. So like a part B to that question, and that's probably, for you and I, since we're both living overseas, we vote by absentee ballot. Where does that actually play a role in the process?
Well, absentee ballot is okay, so there's two types of ballots. There's the mail-in ballot, which Trump makes this distinction. Okay, so Trump says you have a mail-in ballot, like in the state of California, where they mail everybody a ballot, and then you mail it back in. He calls that a mail-in ballot. When you and I, because we're overseas, request a ballot absentee, that's different. So under his theory, absentee ballots are better because we've taken the step to request them as opposed to having them sent to us proactively by the states. Now, what's interesting about overseas voters this time is that, as a rule, overseas voters turnout is pathetic. There's roughly, I'm making up, these are general numbers. I mean, these are as good as people have. There's roughly 3 million Americans who vote overseas. So you and I are 2 of 3 million. And of us, the voting participation rate is 7% in 2016. That number, by all estimates, is going to triple, if not go up even higher this year. So there has never been a year when American expats have been more engaged in voting absentee and getting their ballots in. My hypothetical is that those of us who live overseas see this how the United States is viewed from abroad now, see the approach of a unilateral foreign policy. It does not work, and I think that Americans overseas are now getting more and more involved in the process than they've ever been, but we'll see.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we have another question. In today's Australian Financial Review, it was noted that there is some concerns in Australia regarding Biden's policy to increase the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, because it would have a significant impact on the profitability of Australian super funds with investments in the US. What policies, if any, does Trump have on tax and inbound investment that might impact Australian super funds and multinationals?
Trump or Biden? Trump's policy, I presume, is the same as it's always gonna be. I think the Biden one is, this is where the Senate is gonna really come into play, because how much, well, taxes are going up in the United States under if Biden wins and the Democrats get the Senate. The question is how much will they go up? Corporate tax rate will likely go up under the scenario of the blue wave. Individual tax rate is going to go up. On the proposal I've seen from Biden is if you make $1 million a year, so your threshold, if you make $1 million a year or more, capital gains is going to be taxed at your individual rate. So your capital gains tax, if you make $1 million or more, is going to go way up. Your income tax is going to go up. I think the threshold was $400,000 a year or more. But look, all of that has to get, the president can't do that in our system. That has to get negotiated by the Congress. And so that's the thing to watch is, do the Democrats get the Senate and the White House and the House? The first things that the Biden administration will most likely work on is getting stimulus done and getting investment, and it'll be through infrastructure. So tax is going to be part of that, because you're gonna have to pay for part of this. And is it just going to be a straight rollback of all the Trump tax cuts? Is it going to be a partial rollback? Are there going to be new taxes in? All of that will have to get it debated. But I mean, that's the real question to watch is who is going to be in, if the Democrats get the Senate, and then who's going to be Treasury Secretary? Is it going to be somebody like Lyle Brainerd, or is it going to be somebody like Elizabeth Warren? And you could see a very different, a different administration approach depending on who gets Treasury. I read today, that President Biden may say he doesn't want any senators in his cabinet because he's going to need every vote in the Senate, and especially if they have to get up to 60 votes to get some things passed. In which case, then that takes out, Senator Warren, but then it takes out people like Senator Coons too for certain seats. So and Senator Klobuchar for certain seats. So it's all a lot to watch, but it's the right question to ask. But I think the short taxes are going up if the Democrats get the House, Senate, and White House.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I think there's another question on trade, and here we go. Trump has pulled out of trade bodies, including the TPP. He has pushed an America First approach to trade and foreign policy, leading to increased protectionism via tariffs, export controls, etc. Asia is a massively trade-driven region. How much would a Biden win change the picture for trade with Asia and the world?
I'm going to answer. I'll give you try to do this two different answers. I think the first one is to watch is on China, right? Because the Trump approach to China, as a Biden foreign policy team says, right? The Trump approach to China is all confrontation, right? You confront China on everything. You confront China on, Huawei. You confront China on 5G. You confront China on all of their unfair trade practices as the U.S. has found them. You confront China, in the South China Sea. You confront them on everything, and you do it unilaterally. The Biden approach is going to be, it's going to have two different changes. One is it's going to be a multilateral approach. It's not that the United States is not going to take on China. The United States is going to work with Australia and Japan and Korea and the EU. And how do you do that? You could do it through the WTO. You could do it through some plurilateral or, multi-party trade agreements. And so you're going to see definitely a return to multilateralism. And like the vice president has said, is going to return to, Paris. He's going to return to the WHO. I think they'll stop blocking all the judges on the WTO to keep that going. So you'll have a more unilateral approach. You're not going to see ridiculous, claims of national security to put tariffs on allies like the EU and Mexico and Canada. I mean, so that will clearly drop. But the approach to China is still going to be, on some things you have to confront them. On some things you outright compete with them on a level playing field where you have one, and on some things you cooperate. And you have to cooperate with them on the two biggest things: climate change, and COVID, and pandemics going forward. It's not easy, right? So how do you make sure that when you're negotiating with the Chinese on climate change, that they're not trading off something on, cybersecurity or market access or cyber theft or IPR protection? So it is going to be a challenge because it's a new paradigm of how you're going to negotiate with the Chinese, where you cooperate and confront at the same time, and you don't let those two things blur. So I think that's the how trade will change. TPP is not going to happen, I don't think, anytime soon, because one, I don't think the United States just doesn't have the bandwidth for it when Biden comes in. I mean, the focus is going to be ending, as much as you can, ending the pandemic until you get to a vaccine. If there is a trade deal, it will probably be with the UK. The US UK will have some trade deal, so you will probably see that. Then the other thing, if you would, for those who follow US trade policy, there's something called Trade Promotion Authority where Congress basically ties its own hands and says to the president, we will require of ourselves to do an up or down vote on a trade agreement, as opposed to picking and choosing every section within a trade agreement, which we have the right to do as Congress before we would approve it. Trade Promotion Authority basically binds Congress's hand and gives the president the authority, so that when they negotiate with a foreign government, the foreign government knows that the agreement will get an up or down vote in the Congress and not get renegotiated by the Congress. Problem is, Trade Promotion Authority expires, I think it's July 1st, and will a Democratic Congress renew that trade authority? Probably, I don't know, maybe not. So trade is not going to be a big agenda item for the first 2 years. Now, is there one last thing I'm going to throw out there that you really need to watch is what happens, not in the next 2 years, but in the next 2 months, right? If Donald Trump loses, and he is still president until Inauguration Day, so that gives him basically 2 months and change to do anything he wants to do within his executive authority. Is he going to put more sanctions on China? Is he going to add more companies to the entities list, especially the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent? Will they become on the entity list of the United States? Will he put on sanctions for human rights violations when it comes to forced labor? Might he find Vietnam manipulating its currency and put tariffs on Vietnamese goods, countervailing duties? So all of this, Trump has the authority to do in 2 months. So just because Biden wins, do think about what's going to happen in January under a Biden administration, but don't stop thinking about what's going to happen in between Election Day and Inauguration Day, that this administration still has its full authority to undertake.
Absolutely. So we have a really good question here that changes it up a little bit, and that is, what is the likelihood of a civil war erupting in the event that Trump loses the election? And he calls out to his base support, Proud Boys, as that's come out in the media on a number of occasions, and even during debates. So, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I will say, sitting here in Singapore, and I'm sure with you in Australia, I mean, we don't. I tend to discount it. Although I will tell you, my friends in the U.S. are extremely worried about this, and so I don't have the my finger on the pulse being there like they do. And you're seeing businesses boarding up in Washington D.C. and in Los Angeles, and I'm sure in other cities, New York. That people think that there could be riots, and I think it could erupt either way. If Trump claims victory, it could go both sides, and it is I think the only thing that that gives me hope is that everybody is really prepared for this right now. Everybody recognizes that the president's rhetoric is causing this. And it will be interesting to see if the Republican governors and Republican officials would sit by idly if this were to happen in the scenario that Trump were to lose, but were to actually call for violence, or to insinuate that there might be violence. I think the thing that maybe I'm being too rational, but if Donald Trump loses on Election Day, The Republican governors are going to know that he's not going to be president in January. It's just going to be a question, how ugly is it going to be between now and in January? And if the voters in Florida, where you have a Republican governor, if the voters in Florida vote for Joe Biden by 1, 2, 3 points, enough that it's a clear win. It'll be close in Florida no matter what, but enough that it's a clear win. Is that Florida governor going to fight his own constituents, knowing that Donald Trump's going to be gone in January and that he could be recalled, he could be impeached as the governor of Florida if he were to go along with that? What will the Pennsylvania legislature do? What will the Arizona governor do? What would the Iowa governor do in those scenarios? So I think that Donald Trump can say a lot of things, but he doesn't have the authority over the elections. The authority over the elections starts in the 51, the 50 states plus my hometown, Washington, D.C. So it starts with the 51, and then from there, it could go to the courts. Ultimately, it goes to the House of Representatives, but it's not, Donald Trump has no authority over this. So I'm hopeful that while we know what his rhetoric is going to be, because he says he's been saying it for 5 years now. He said when he won in 2016 that there was fraud. He didn't even accept the election then. So we know what his rhetoric is going to be, but I'm more hopeful, I think, than my friends are back home. I don't know if that's a good thing for me to be right now, but I am.
Right. Okay, well, we have another question, and that question is, assuming Biden wins, how do you think Joe Biden and his age issue plays out with Kamala Harris? Do you think he would see out the first term and look for a transition in the second term, or could it happen during the first term?
Well, it's if you go by my last slide, I always go back I look for historical precedents to say, okay, what can we learn from the past? You've never seen a president step down midterm to hand it over to the vice president. I mean, it happened for health reasons or otherwise, but to voluntarily say I'm not going to be president anymore. There's just no historical precedent for it, so I discount it as almost 100% for that reason. For that reason alone, it's clear what model Biden will follow with Harris as his vice president, because it's going to be the exact model that Obama followed with Biden. Biden loved that model. He felt, he said, his deal with Obama was that he was the first one in and the last one out for every big decision, for every big meeting, because that's where you have the most influence, right? When you're the first person to talk to a decision maker and you're the last person to talk to the decision maker before the decision maker gets made. Biden said, that was one of my conditions to Obama to accept to be vice president. He said, I got to offer that to Harris. I didn't even have to, she didn't have to ask for it. They said, this is how we're going to do it. So you have a model that you see, it's going to be it is going to be a partnership approach. I think you're going to see Harris take the lead on some issues, like you saw Joe Biden take the lead on other issues. Senator Harris is not a foreign policy person. She's not a trade person. Joe Biden is more of those things. So I would guess, if you're looking at how they're going to split up a little bit of who's going to be working on what, you're going to see Biden do more on the foreign policy side, Harris do more on the domestic policy side as a start. But Joe Biden will be the oldest president we've ever had. Could we see an 80-year-old running, an 80-plus-year-old running for re-election? Too hard to predict right now. But Harris, if Biden were to win, Harris would clearly be in the driver's seat to be the next presidential nominee, be it in 2024 or 2028, whenever it happens.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll have one more question, and that is, and you touched on it during your presentation on human rights. So the question is, which human rights issues will be the focus under Biden administration? Xinjiang, Tibet, Mongolia, Hong Kong. How should businesses be thinking about human rights beyond just from a governmental perspective?
I think yes, and all of the above and beyond. This isn't just going to be a China issue. I get to put my ESG hat on here. We're going for a bit. Look, I mean, responsible sourcing is going to be critical for investors, be it GPs or LPs. You need to make sure that your supply chain is sustainable. And it's not. It is going to. It could be forced labor in China, but it could be forced labor in Malaysia on palm oil plantations. It could be forced labor in Thailand, where you have literally Cambodian slave labor on fishing vessels, getting the seafood that goes into pet food. It could be forced labor and child labor in Africa when it comes to cocoa. I mean, you've got that legislation in the United States, is ready to go, and I would think that a Democratic House and Senate is much more likely to pass that. So sourcing in the supply chain when it comes to forced labor and child labor everywhere is going to be a critical issue. So that's one thing to be looking at from an ESG perspective. Then you have the human rights element of it, and so in Xinjiang, for example, if you are if you're a textile investment right now, but there is a possibility, I'm not going to say probability, but I would say certainly there's a possibility that there could be a ban on all exports from Xinjiang. Now Xinjiang has, China supplies about 25% of the world's cotton comes out of China. About 80% of that cotton comes from Xinjiang. If you take 80% of 25% of the world's cotton out of the supply chain, what is that going to do if you're in textiles, if you're in retail, anywhere? And even if you try and do that, very hard when you have a commodity like cotton to know where it's from. And so palm oil, it took years and years and years for people to start to figure out what plantation did the palm oil come from. Cotton's no one's even been thinking about that yet. Cocoa's tough, coffee's tough, cotton's gonna be even tougher. So I think it's things to be thinking about. It's not just Hong Kong and Xinjiang and Tibet, Taiwan, if something were to happen cross straits between now and the next few months, but it's well beyond that, and it's all different things. Then the other things on human rights in China is not the forced labor issues, but are you making components that are going and being used by Chinese businesses or the Chinese government that get into security, that get into, so for example, are they using drones? Are you making components that are going into drones that are flying over Tibet or flying over, flying in Xinjiang or wherever it may be? That's another issue you're going to have on human rights as well. So it's a very broad. It's not just, well, there's sanctions on Carrie Lam and we're going to make sure that we don't have a bank account with her. Those are easier ones. The supply chain and human rights gets to be a lot harder, and that's coming. And I would say the other thing that the Biden administration is going to do beyond human rights, it's going to be climate change. Climate change is going to become part of their economic, is going to become part of the economic relations between countries. They're going to want to see, the United States is going to have to step up, of course, but other countries are going to have to step up too. And so climate is going to be part of the diplomatic and economic relationships when it comes to foreign policy under a Biden administration. And I would say the last thing is on the opportunity side. If you heard Secretary Clinton describe it this way, foreign policy, you have there's 3 Ds when it comes to foreign policy. There's defense, there's diplomacy, and there's development. Right? And the development piece of diplomacy has not been used very much by a Trump administration. A little bit. You're seeing more and more investment coming in, a little bit to counter, Belt and Road, and a little bit to counter AIIB. You're going to see more development money coming in. That's going to be potential, co-investments with private equity funds. So infrastructure, I mean, the needs in Southeast Asia, where I am, are so great, and there's so much need for that type of investment. And in the U.S. is hopefully going to get a lot more development money coming in. So there's investment opportunities to come to that are going to come out of a Biden administration.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'll just check and see if we have any additional questions coming through. We're actually close to the end of our presentation today.
I always like ending on an optimistic note. That was a good one. So there's no more.
Well, I don't have any further questions from our audience today, so I think we'll look to wrap things up. So I wanted to, Steve, again, thank you for your time and your insights. And I also wanted to thank our audience. Thank you all for joining us today. And within the next, hopefully, 48 hours, we hope to know the outcomes of the U.S. elections. This time around, it may not be as cut and dry as Steve has discussed earlier, but fingers crossed that we have a peaceful and a clear outcome in the U.S. elections. Following this presentation, please join us by registering for part 2 of the Council's political series, Election Results, which is next Monday, the 9th of November. We'll be welcoming our U.S. political expert, Steve. Again, thank you for joining us again. And we also have the Honorable Joe Hockey, the ex-ambassador of Australia to the United States. So please stay tuned. And you should shortly see the registration go up for that series coming up on the 9th of November. We look forward to seeing you again at the next political series, and have a great remainder of the day. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you. See you soon.